18 years ago, 3 innocent lives were left behind because they didn't resemble their parents. Rejected at birth and abandoned without a second thought, their future seemed uncertain, but destiny had other plans. You won't believe how this story unfolds. Stay tuned, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel for more gripping narratives. At St. Mary's Medical Center in North Charleston, the cries of triplets, a boy and 2 girls, echoed through the delivery room, piercing the air with the sound of new life. Their tiny faces were full of innocence, and their skin was a rich, dark brown that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The nurses smiled as they wrapped the babies in soft blankets, ready to place them in their parents' waiting arms. But the joy evaporated the moment John and Rose Warren saw them. Rose's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide with shock. She looked to her husband for comfort, but found only cold disbelief. John stood rigid, his face pale and fists clenched. He didn't move closer or speak, his silence filling the room, heavy and suffocating. "They're beautiful," a nurse whispered, trying to ease the tension, but her words fell flat. Rose's shoulders sagged, trembling as she looked at the babies again. Their dark skins seemed to mock her, shattering everything she thought she knew. She reached out but hesitated, pulling back as her heart twisted painfully. John's voice cut through the air, cold and final. "We need time to think," he said sharply, leaving no room for argument. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Rose watched him leave, her chest tightening and her world collapsing. She couldn't follow. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, her mind numb with disbelief. The nurses exchanged worried glances, and when they tried to place the babies in Rose's arms, she shook her head, eyes distant and empty. "I just need a moment," she whispered, turning away in defeat. The nurses carried the triplets to the nursery, laying them side by side in a single crib. Their tiny hands found each other, clinging to the only warmth they knew. But no one came to hold them or whisper promises of love. That night, John and Rose made their decision. They refused to see the babies again, signing away their parental rights with cold finality. "It's impossible," John muttered, his jaw clenched and eyes fixed on the floor. "They can't be ours." His denial was fierce, a shield against the truth he couldn't face. Rose, her heart shattered, signed her name through blurred tears. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but fear and shame swallowed her voice. Setting the pen down, she walked away, hollow and heavy, without looking back. Neither did John. Whispers rippled through the hospital as the story spread. Some speculated about hidden genetics, ancient ancestry resurfacing unexpectedly. Others murmured about a man's inability to accept children who didn't reflect his image. But no one truly understood. The triplets were left behind, nameless and alone, their cries echoing through the nursery. Nurses took turns holding them, whispering soft lullabies, trying to fill the void left by the parents who had abandoned them. But they knew it wasn't enough. Days passed, and the story spread further. People wondered who would take in 3 babies at once, especially with the scandal attached to their names. Would they be separated before they even knew the world? For now, the triplets lay together, their tiny fingers entwined, their breath synchronized. They had no names, no identity beyond each other. But they weren't broken, not yet. Their journey was just beginning. In Somerville, news traveled fast. David and Jane Turner quickly heard about the 3 abandoned babies. 3 infants left behind not due to illness or poverty, but because they didn't resemble their parents. It seemed cruel, unfair, but it was real. Jane's heart sank as she heard the story. David saw the pain in her eyes, the familiar ache that had haunted them for years. They had tried for so long, prayed for a family, but their arms remained empty. Until now. "They need us," Jane said, her voice trembling. David knew then that they would go, that their lives were about to change. Nervous but resolute, they arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center. A nurse led them to the nursery, her expression soft with hope. "They've been together since birth," she explained. "They only sleep when they're touching. It's like they already know they need each other. David and Jane stood over the crib, looking down at three tiny, peaceful faces, a boy and two girls. Jane's heart swelled with emotion, and she reached out, gently touching the boy's cheek. "Caleb," she whispered, the name feeling right, as if it had always belonged to him. David's voice was rough with emotion as he looked at the first girl. "Chloe," he murmured, his heart tightening. The third lay close, her face serene, her body pressed against her sister's. "Nia," Jane whispered, her voice breaking. "Our little Nia." 3 names for 3 souls who needed them. David's chest tightened with resolve. "All 3, he said firmly. "They stay together. We're their family now." Jane nodded, her tears falling silently. "Yes, all 3. Within weeks, the adoption was finalized and the Turners brought the triplets home to Somerville, knowing their lives would never be the same. The triplets grew, surrounded by love and security. Caleb was gentle and empathetic, always the first to comfort his sisters. Chloe was curious, her eyes wide with wonder, always asking questions. Nia was bold, her laughter filling the house, her spirit unbreakable. They were happy, thriving, and loved. But the world was waiting, ready to question their place and identity. David and Jane knew the questions would come, the stares would follow, but they were ready to face it all together as a family. The world would have its doubts, but their love was unwavering. They were the Turners, bound not by blood, but by choice, commitment, and love. As the triplets grew older, they began to notice the world around them. At school, the questions started innocently. "Why don't you look like your parents? Are you adopted?" At first, they shrugged the questions off, but the stares grew heavier, the whispers sharper. By age 10, the questions came home. Chloe, her eyes wet with tears, asked, "Why don't we look like you?" Her voice was small, fragile, as if afraid of the answer. David pulled her close, his heart breaking. "Because love doesn't look like anything," he said softly. "It feels like this." Jane wrapped her arms around them both. "We chose you," she added gently. "That's what matters." But Chloe's eyes held questions they couldn't answer, doubts they couldn't erase. Wherever they went, the triplets faced stares. Neighbors watched too closely. Strangers whispered behind polite smiles. The weight of curiosity and judgment followed them. By the time they were older, suspicion and misunderstanding had twisted into prejudice. "Are they really yours?" someone asked once, eyes narrowed. David's jaw tightened with anger, but he answered calmly. "Yes, they are ours." He held his head high, refusing to justify his family to people who couldn't see beyond skin color. But the damage was done. The triplets had heard the doubts and absorbed them. Chloe turned to books, searching for answers. Caleb grew quiet, his shoulders heavier. Nia fought back with defiance, her chin held high. But at night, she would curl up beside Chloe, her voice small. "They're wrong, right?" Chloe would hold her tight, her heart heavy. "Yeah, they're wrong." But the fear lingered. David and Jane saw the questions growing, the pain their children carried. They did their best to reassure them, but some answers weren't easy to find. For years, David and Jane Turner shielded Caleb, Chloe, and Nia from the harsh realities of the world. They surrounded them with love, hoping it would be enough to counteract prejudice. But love alone couldn't change the world's biases. It could only stand firm, unwavering, resilient, refusing to let ignorance tear them apart. As teenagers, the triplets excelled. Caleb poured his emotions into music, Chloe devoured knowledge, and Nia's speed on the track left crowds speechless. Yet, their success only seemed to magnify the questions and whispers that followed them everywhere. Where did they come from? Why don't they look like their parents? The judgments were silent but heavy, carried in every lingering glance. The weight of being different, of not fitting into society's narrow expectations, settled on them. Caleb withdrew, his laughter fading. Chloe's curiosity sharpened, her questions more pointed. Nia's boldness turned defensive, anger simmering beneath her bright smiles. They were loved. They were cherished. but they were lost. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Chloe finally voiced the question that had haunted them for years. Why did they leave us? The words hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Caleb looked down at his hands, his fingers tightening. Who are they? Do they even care? Nia's jaw clenched, her eyes fierce. We need to know. David and Jane had always known this moment would come. But knowing didn't make it any easier. Your birth parents chose to leave, David said gently, his voice thick with emotion. But that choice was theirs, not yours. You were always enough. You are enough. Jane reached for his hand, her grip steady. But the answers weren't enough. Not anymore. The triplets needed closure. They needed to face the shadows of their past. They exchanged a glance, their decision unspoken but unanimous. Caleb straightened his shoulders. His voice was steady. We have to find them. Chloe and Nia nodded, determination hardening their features. They needed the truth, no matter how painful. David's heart clenched, fear tightening in his chest. But he saw the resolve in their eyes, the courage that refused to back down. We'll help you, he said quietly. Jane's voice was soft but fierce. We're family. That won't change, no matter what. With their parents' support, Caleb, Chloe, and Nia began their search. It didn't take long to find the names. John and Rose Warren. They wrote a letter. We are your children. We need to know why you left us. Weeks passed in silence. Then, finally, a reply came. We will meet you. It's time for the truth. The triplets stood outside a modest house in Charleston, their hearts pounding. The door creaked open. John stood there, his face cold and guarded. Behind him, Rose watched with eyes full of fear and guilt. There were no hugs, no words of welcome, only silence. Caleb spoke first, his voice steady but heavy with pain. Why did you leave us? The question cut through the air. John looked away, his jaw clenched. His voice was hollow. We were ashamed. Nia's eyes flashed with anger. So you abandoned us? Her voice was sharp, disbelief turning to pain. We were babies. We needed you. Chloe's lips trembled. Her voice cracked. You left us alone because you were ashamed. Rose's shoulders sagged. Tears streamed down her face. We were scared, she whispered, her voice fragile. We were weak, and we took the easy way out. Her words were heavy with guilt, her body trembling under the weight of her choices. Caleb's face was pale. His chest tightened. We grew up wondering why we weren't enough, he said quietly, his voice breaking. We thought it was our fault. His words were raw, vulnerable, the pain of 18 years echoing through every syllable. John's eyes closed. His shoulders sank. It was our fault, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not yours. We were selfish. Cowards. He looked at them then, his eyes wet with regret. We were wrong. Silence followed, cold and suffocating. Chloe's tears fell as she clenched her fists. Nia's jaw tightened, anger giving way to grief. Caleb's shoulders sagged. His heart ached, breaking and healing all at once. We didn't need perfection, he said softly. We just needed parents. Chloe wiped her tears, her gaze dark. You let your shame be more important than your children. Nia's voice was cold, final. You left us, but we found love without you. They turned away, their heads held high. Their pain was heavy, but no longer crushing. Rose's sobs echoed behind them, raw and unrelenting. John stood motionless, haunted by his choices. But the triplets didn't look back. They walked away, away from the past, away from the pain, away from the shadows that had followed them for so long. David and Jane were waiting, their arms open, their faces filled with love and relief. Caleb leaned into David's hug, his body trembling, his heart full. Chloe cried into Jane's shoulder, her burden finally lifting. Nia stood strong, her soul healing. As they drove away, the sun dipped below the horizon. Shadows stretched long, but the light followed them, warm and steady, guiding them home. Caleb's voice was soft, almost a whisper. We were always enough. Chloe took his hand, squeezing it tightly. Nia leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing. They had faced the past, and together they would build their future. The confrontation had changed them, but it did not define them. Caleb, Chloe, and Nia walked away with pain but also clarity. They knew now that they were not shaped by the parents who abandoned them, but by the ones who had chosen them. They were Turners, bound not by blood, but by love. Caleb returned to his music. His melodies were stronger, bolder. Chloe poured her emotions into writing, her words powerful and fearless. Nia ran faster than ever, her laughter echoing, her spirit unbreakable. The whispers and stares at school continued, but they no longer mattered. The triplets walked tall, side by side. United. They knew who they were. They belonged. They were enough. On graduation day, they stood together, faces bright with hope. Caleb was headed to music school, Chloe to journalism, Nia to national competitions. Their futures were limitless, their dreams alive. David and Jane watched them, eyes filled with tears of pride. They had fought for this family, loved fiercely, stood firm. They had chosen these children, and they would choose them again, every single day. That night, they sat around the dinner table, laughter and love filling the room. Caleb broke the silence, his voice soft. Thank you for choosing us. David's voice cracked, his heart full. You were always meant to be ours. Chloe smiled, her heart light. We are enough. Nia lifted her chin, her voice fierce. We are Turner strong. They had faced the truth, embraced their identity, and found their place. Their story was proof that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, about love, and about the people who stand by you no matter what.